garden of shadows.
Hi my angels, it's Hailey Reese, and for today's video, once again, I am super excited because this video has been so highly requested by you guys for as long as I can remember, and we are finally going to be diving into the Lizzie Borden case, which is not only notorious for the Borden's home being haunted, but also notorious as an unsolved murder case. I'm sure at one point or another, many of you have heard of the Lizzie Borden house and kind of heard of the events that transpired there. Maybe because you've looked into paranormal investigations and people have went to the Borden house to investigate, which is up there on my bucket list as well. Or maybe you just heard of the Lizzie Borden case because it is an unsolved murder mystery. It's really an unsolved murder case. And there's so much speculation even to this day surrounding who actually murdered Andrew and Abby Borden. While many believe that it's Lizzie Borden, I really wanted to take this case into my own hands and really deliver to you guys everything prior to the murder of Andrew and Abby Borden, and then kind of get into everything that transpired after the fact, and then furthermore get into the hauntings that take place in the Borden house now. So I hope that you guys enjoyed today's video. Thank you so much for requesting it. Make sure you guys let me know any video requests that you have down below. And without further ado, let's just dive right on into the case of Lizzie Borden. I really feel like it's important for me to dive into the dynamic prior to the murders and kind of give you guys the backstory on the family. That way you can furthermore understand the family dynamic and in turn form your own opinions as to what you think transpired on August 4th. So without further ado, let's just get right on into this case because there are tons of details and I don't want to miss any. So in 1847, Andrew Borden purchased a house in Fall River, Massachusetts with his wife, Sarah Borden. Andrew actually rebuilt the house to accommodate his family, and the two would live there with their two daughters, Emma Borden and Lizzie Borden. However, in 1863, Sarah Borden would sadly pass away, and 3 years later, Andrew Borden would remarry a woman by the name of Abby Gray, who as his wife would take his last name and become Abby Borden. Now, despite having been a little girl when her father remarried, it was said that Lizzie Borden in particular really didn't like her stepmother, and that at some point she would even refer to her as Mrs. Borden rather than Mom. It's said that Lizzie Borden believed that she just married for her father's wealth, and so they kind of always had this awkward tension. It was even said that both Emma and Lizzie Borden very rarely ate meals with their parents because both of them kind of had issues, not only with the stepmother, but with their father as well. They had some things that they disagreed with him on. They really disagreed with their father regarding the division of their family properties, and they also disagreed with his way of trying to live such a frugal lifestyle. He lived well below his means, and this didn't particularly go over well with the girls, as the Borden family as a whole is incredibly wealthy, but I should note that their father obtained his wealth by his own work and his own hard work. So the rest of their family was living in these lavish homes and living this great lifestyle, and they kind of felt that it was a disservice to them that their father was living so below the means of his wealth. The four actually lived in their home with their maid, Bridget Sullivan, who actually went by Maggie. And like I said, you know, Andrew Borden really tried to live below his financial means. He was able to afford plenty more than what the family had. In fact, their home lacked indoor plumbing and electricity, which was a very common accommodation for those who were wealthy at that time. Now, Andrew actually had a failing business with his deceased wife's brother, John Morse. But despite having that failing business with him, the Bordens remained incredibly wealthy. In fact, it's estimated that their net worth is equivalent to $10 million in our modern economy right now. It's also very, very important to note that while they had this failing business and Andrew was still completely financially stable, John was not in such a great financial position. This is especially important because John came to visit the Bordens in August of 1892 and was working as a butcher at the time. Now, something that's kind of an interesting detail is before the murders would actually transpire, there was a very strange case of food poisoning in their home that left everybody super ill, and even had Abby Borden questioning the doctor as to whether or not somebody could have put something into their food to make them so violently ill. On August 3rd, it should be noted that John Morse did stay within the family home. He came to visit the Bordens, but he left in the morning. On August 4th, 1892, both Abby Borden and Andrew Borden were murdered in their home in broad daylight with no witnesses. At the time, the only people present in the home was Abby Borden, Andrew Borden, Maggie the maid, and Lizzie Borden. Now these murders, you guys, were violent. Andrew Borden was found first on the couch with 11 hacks to his head. It's actually thought that he'd been sleeping at the time of his murder, so he didn't even see it coming. Abby was actually found upstairs on the guest bedroom floor in the room that John was staying in at the time, and she had 18 hacks to her head. So these murders were excessive. They kind of seemed like a passion murder. It wasn't someone who just went in to kill somebody and get it over quickly. Like 18 hacks are a lot. Like when you really think about, I don't know if you want to, but when you really think about somebody swinging 18 times, hacking somebody's head, it kind of seems like a hate murder. In my opinion, at least. The murder weapon is actually thought to be a hatchet. Now, the broken top piece of an axe was actually found in the Borden basement, but it was completely clean and there was no signs of any evidence on it. So this left the police with nothing to work with. There was no murder weapon, there was no evidence. It's really important to note that there was literally no evidence in the home to lead towards who could have committed this murder. According to the testimonies of Emma, Lizzie, Maggie, the town pharmacist, the town doctors, the events of that morning took place starting as early as 9 a.m. Maggie spent the morning cleaning windows and laid down at around 10:30 a.m. Like I'd said, John had left the house and Andrew had left the house for work, and Abby actually went to a doctor's appointment in the morning. Now, Andrew Borden returned home from a business meeting at 10:40 a.m. and went to the couch to lay down. It's actually said that he still wasn't feeling the greatest from that whole food poisoning thing that had been going on, so he went to the couch for a nap. At 10:50 a.m., Lizzie Borden was in the barn. At 11:15 a.m., it's reported that Lizzie Borden heard a noise from within her house and went to go and investigate it as she saw that the screen was open. When she went into the house, she found her father, Andrew Borden, on the couch with 11 hacks to his head. Now, I do want to note at this particular point in time, the noise in which Lizzie Borden heard is really all over the place. Her statement changed frequently. At times, she would say she heard like a call for help. Other times, she would say that she heard like a moaning, groaning noise. And sometimes she would say that she didn't even hear anything at all and she just came in. So there's a real inconsistency as to what she heard, but she went in and found her father dead on the couch. Now, Maggie was actually not yet asleep when Lizzie Borden began screaming, and I quote, "Come down quick, father's dead. Somebody's come in and killed him." Now, Maggie ran downstairs immediately and was met with the gruesome scene of Andrew Borden on the couch with all of these hacks to his head, and she was met by a Lizzie Borden in a clean blue dress. There was actually no sign of a struggle, and like I said, it's believed that he had been asleep at the time of his murder, so Lizzie sent Maggie to go and get a doctor immediately. When they returned, everybody was kind of wondering where Abby Borden was, and it was around that time that they discovered her body upstairs. Now, after examination between the two bodies, it was presumed that Abby Borden had actually been murdered first, as her body was more cold and his was more warm to the touch, and it seemed as though there was around an hour and a bit between the two murders. Now, police actually came to the conclusion that the murders had to be committed by somebody who was within the house, but there was no evidence to support who it could be. They were really puzzled by the lack of blood in the home. Like, it seemed as though the blood was really secluded to where the individuals had been murdered, where Andrew and Abby had been murdered. There wasn't trails of blood anywhere. There wasn't blood on Lizzie. There wasn't blood on Maggie. And so that really stumped them, as well as the fact that they couldn't locate a murder weapon. And because Emma Borden was out of town at the time of the murder, she was completely ruled out as a suspect. So there are four main theories as to what occurred and who truly murdered Andrew and Abby Borden. Now, I will say, more often than not, it's really believed that Lizzie Borden is at fault for these murders, but there are a couple of other theories as well. So I'm going to take you guys through the four primary theories that people believe could be what actually happened. The first is that their youngest daughter, Lizzie Borden, who was 32 at the time, is the one to have murdered her father and her stepmother. Now, one of the leading factors in this particular theory is that when Andrew Borden returned home from work, it was said that the door was locked. So Maggie went to go and fix the door and let Andrew Borden back inside, and at this time she swears that she had heard a giggle upstairs from Lizzie. Now, what makes this theory so evidential is that if Lizzie Borden had been upstairs giggling at that specific point in time, she would have had no choice but to see the dead body of her stepmother laying there. It was inevitable. Once you went upstairs, you would have seen the body. So if she'd been upstairs giggling, she would have been at the murder scene already. Although Lizzie denies ever having been upstairs. Now, like, Lizzie was said to have got along with her father fairly well, even if they did have disagreements on things. Most of all, she really did try to have a relationship with her father. So people couldn't really understand why she would have murdered her father so brutally. And like I said, her relationship with her stepmother was in fact tense. Now, it is said, like I mentioned earlier, that Lizzie Borden felt as though she should be living within what her father's means truly are, and she was incredibly frustrated by his way of living below the means of his finances. Now, Lizzie, like I mentioned, had a lot of inconsistent answers during the time of the investigation, and interestingly enough, I actually heard that back then they gave her morphine to sedate her pain because she was so devastated by all of this, and so she was also on morphine during the time of her giving answers. But a lot of things in her story continuously changed, and this kind of made her a leading suspect to a lot of people because there was no consistency in her story. A couple other things that really made people believe that Lizzie Borden was guilty was they thought that perhaps she'd seen her father's will and saw that he was leaving her and her sister things and was leaving them the estate. So that was her motive to kill the two of them so that they could live within the means that they've always wanted to. Another thing was that Lizzie Borden was seen burning a dress 3 days after the murders, although she claims that the dress had nothing to do with it. And in fact, the dress wasn't the dress that Maggie saw Lizzie in when she went downstairs. It wasn't that blue dress. Although people then argue perhaps she could have murdered them and changed, and that would make sense. But then other people said, really, would she have time and wouldn't there be blood everywhere? That doesn't make complete sense. But then there's also a theory that she murdered them naked, so that there would be no evidence of anything. Any blood she got on her, she could simply wash off in the shower of some sorts, and that was how she got away with murdering them and then putting the blue dress on directly after to make it look like she hadn't murdered them. However, here's where things get a little bit interesting. The day before the murders, Lizzie was actually attempting to purchase prussic acid, which is like a poison, and was denied it. She claimed that she wanted the poison to clean with, but now when you think about it, if she had murdered her family, perhaps she thought about just poisoning them. Maybe she'd even been poisoning the food, and that was where the food poisoning came from. And then when she was denied access to the poison that she needed to do the trick, she had no choice but to axe their heads. Now, a theory that doesn't involve Lizzie Borden is that of John. It's actually thought by some that John Morse is the murderer. He was visiting, and yes, he left in the morning, but actually on the day of August 4th, he was unaccounted for between 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. And he claimed he was seeing a doctor, but that doctor was actually at the Borden home tending to the murder scene. So people started to raise red flags naturally, and speculation began flying that perhaps it could be John Morse, and that his motive could be that he knew about the will and told Lizzie about the will, because it was said that the night before he had talked a little bit about the will with Andrew Borden. I forgot to mention that. So people thought that he was the one who told Lizzie about the will and that he knew about the will, and so he wanted to kill him in light of that. Others believe that maybe he was just so frustrated over his failed business with Andrew and the fact that he wasn't doing well, but Andrew still managed to be wealthy despite their failing business. So that could have been his motive. But ultimately, when all the facts were checked, he was ruled out as a suspect. Now, the next theory that doesn't involve Lizzie Borden is that Maggie the maid was the murderer, as she wasn't fully asleep at the time that the crimes happened, and Maggie's bedroom was actually directly above where Andrew Borden was murdered. So people were like, how could she not have heard that? I mean, when somebody's hacked 11 times in the head, I'm sure you would hear something and come to investigate. So that was kind of where people started to think maybe Maggie was involved. But that didn't make too much sense, as killing her employers would then put her out of a job. So that leads me into the fourth theory, which is that Maggie was actually in a relationship with Lizzie, and the two of them did it together, and that was their way of getting the wealth. And some people even think that because they were in love, the Bordens may have caught them, and so they killed them to silence them. Whereas others think that Lizzie knew about the will, and so she murdered her parents, but Maggie was her alibi to fall back on in case anything happened. You know, the dress wasn't stained and, you know, she couldn't have done it type of thing. So that was kind of an interesting theory, although some people find that to be highly unlikely. So Lizzie Borden was actually arrested on August 11th, 1892. She was indicted by the grand jury. However, the trial didn't begin until June 1893, and she was in prison during that time span. Lizzie was ultimately, at the end of it all, found not guilty, although so many people believed that she was. I'm sure you guys have heard the nursery rhyme too. It's like Lizzie Borden got an axe, gave her mother 40 whacks. When she saw what she had done, she gave her father 41. Is that what it is? Anyways, there's even a song about it. Like, people really believed that she had done it. And interestingly enough, during her trial, it really seemed as though people were standing behind her. But later, when Lizzie would choose to continue to live within that area, people really didn't like her. When she would attend church and stuff, nobody would sit near her, and nobody really wanted anything to do with her. So Emma and Lizzie actually lived together in Maplecroft until Emma decided to move in 1905. And Lizzie Borden actually remained in Maplecroft until she died in 1927 at the age of 67. She was actually buried right by the graves of her parents, which was in Fall Rivers Oak Grove Cemetery. So here's where we get into present day. The home in which the Bordens were murdered in has been restored to exactly what it was in 1892. So it looks exactly as it did when the Bordens lived there. And it's now open as a public bed and breakfast for people to go and stay in. And they don't try to hide from the history of it either. There's images of what occurred in there. It's kind of notorious for those seeking the paranormal or people who know the history, who really want to stay in the home. And you're able to stay exactly in the home as it's restored to what it was back then that they were murdered in. Which leads me into the hauntings. I mean, I would completely expect this space to be haunted, so it might not come as a shock to any of you, but the Borden home is incredibly haunted. People have reported seeing Abby Borden, people have reported seeing Andrew Borden. Sometimes people even see Maggie, and some people even see Lizzie. There's actually a picture I want to show you guys. This woman who was staying in the room that Abby Borden was killed in saw something weird next to the bed and took this image, which is just chilling. Lights flicker on and off, shadows are seen, footsteps are heard, voices are heard, and occasion people will hear screams and crying, and it just has this overwhelming feeling of heaviness, like something or someone is in there, which I mean, rightfully so. I've mentioned before in a lot of my videos that when somebody dies unexpectedly, it's much more common for them to wind up staying in that space or trapped in that space, because some of them don't even realize that they're dead, or the events were so traumatic that they're holding on to the space in which they transpired in. These would be events like murder or suicide or quick accidents, things like that. Those are more often than not the spirits that are found remaining in the spaces. So it really doesn't come as a surprise to me that the Borden home is so haunted, given all of its history. Well, you guys, that is ultimately the overall Lizzie Borden case and the hauntings that occur there. This has been so highly requested, so I really hope that you guys enjoyed today's video. I know that it was a little bit on the darker side, but I figured since so many people have been requesting I talk about the hauntings there, I would kind of cram everything into one video so that you guys could not only hear that the place is haunted, but hear why the space is haunted. And let me know in the comments below who you think murdered Andrew and Abby. Do you think it was Lizzie Borden? Do you think it was John? Do you think Maggie had something to do with it? Or do you think it was an outside source? Let me know in the comments below. I am like pretty torn on it. Part of me thinks it might be Lizzie Borden. The other part thinks I don't know much. So that is it for today's video, you guys. If you're new to my channel, make sure you go ahead and click that subscribe button, and please give this video a big thumbs up if you did enjoy it. Remember, my loves, to do all things with kindness, and until next time, I love you guys.